Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I see people dialing in from all over. Welcome, thank you for joining us. My name's Megan Baker. I am the VP of Customer Success here at White Ops. Just real quick, mic check. Hopefully everyone can hear me. If not, all right, I think we are good to go. So again, thank you for joining us. Today we are hosting this webinar as an Ask Us Anything with regard to the ICEBUCKET investigation that we published last week on our blog. This comes from our Satori Threat Intel and Research team, and we're very excited to have a few of the members of that team here today to do a quick overview of the investigation and the results of that, as well as answer some of your questions. So hopefully everybody here was able to give the blog a read. The blog is called Giving Fraudsters the Cold Shoulder Inside the Largest Connected TV Bot Attack. We can add that link in a follow-up if you were not able to. This session is also being recorded, so we will be able to host that for anybody who was not able to attend, or if you'd like to re-listen or send over to your teams to listen through. So really quickly for Satori, Satori is a Japanese word meaning comprehension, understanding, and awakening. It's the name that we gave our research team, whose primary focus here is to offer data-driven, actionable, evidence-based guidance during these investigations so that we can properly give our clients recommendations on how to respond to the bot attacks that we are protecting you from. And so with that, I will go ahead and do an introduction here of the panelists. Again, I'm Megan Baker. Aaron got tied up, so if they are able to join, we will introduce them at that point. But I'd like to introduce Mike Moran, PhD data scientist from Detection. Mike, would you like to say a couple words?
Yes, I'm Mike Moran. As Megan said, I work on the detection team, which is involved with identifying advertisement fraud across the various ecosystems and product lines that we provide. And specifically, I'm also the technical lead for our connected TV solutions. So I'm 100% focused on the connected TV and streaming services problem.
Awesome, thank you, Mike. And now I'll introduce Dimitrios Theodorakis, who's the director of the Detection Group.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Dimitrios Theodorakis. I'm the detection lead here at White Ops. I lead a team of security researchers, data scientists, and data analysts. We work on the detection problem. We build the engine that is classifying valid from invalid traffic in all the different scenarios. I've been with White Ops for 2 years, fighting ad fraud for the last 5-ish years, have been involved in several operations.
Wonderful, thanks, Dimitrios. All right, if we can hop to the next slide, I'm going to ask Mike to do a quick overview, kind of high level of what the ICEBUCKET operation entailed, and then we can hop into some questions.
Of course. So for those that have not read the blog post, this will be somewhat new, somewhat old. For those that haven't read it, this should be brand new. ICEBUCKET is a large SSAI spoofing operation that we uncovered and started actively fighting against earlier this year. And actually, Adam, if you go to the next slide, please. And when we talk about this as an SSAI spoofing operation, it's because the traffic itself was designed to look like legitimate SSAI traffic. SSAI spoofing, which I'll shortly get into, is a very easy way to scale a fraud operation to look like a whole bunch of different connected TV and mobile devices and users. And this is a prime target for fraudsters because of the usually higher cost per milli that especially connected TV traffic can garner, but in addition to different mobile devices. Vast majority of the traffic that was being spoofed during this operation appeared to be originating from the United States. So the operation was trying to pretend to be those high cost per milli users with connected TV devices, with mobile devices, as well as in a high cost per milli country like the United States to garner even more monetary returns for their fraud schemes. At its peak, it was around 1.9 billion pre-bid ad requests that we saw. White Ops protects somewhere around 80% of the programmatic advertising ecosystem. So that's just a huge number of total number of bid requests. And it amounted to, for what we could see, around 28% of the global CTV traffic that we covered. Net percentage is large, but with large fraud operations like this, they will, because of their scaling and because of how they've expanded their reach, take up a large proportion of that traffic until we get a chance to take them down. Can we go to the next slide, please, Adam? So SSAI spoofing, so SSAI, or server-side ad insertion, is a way in which video advertisements can be inserted into like a regular video stream. If you think of it like the commercial breaks on regular linear TV, that's the concept that was designed for it. So the device, the connected TV device, the gaming console, the mobile phone streaming video, it will receive one continuous stream of content and ads and content, which will provide a better end user experience for the people actually viewing that video. The way that SSAI works is that it acts as an intermediary between those edge devices, those connected TV, what have you, and the rest of the ad tech ecosystem. So they'll actually send the requests on behalf of those edge devices to an SSP, and then that SSP will contact the SSAI server to say, here's the ad that was actually filled for that request. The SSAI server then stitches that into the continuous video stream and delivers one stream of video out to the edge device for that user to view. Where SSAI spoofing takes place is if that SSAI server isn't actually a legitimate SSAI server, and it is sending out a slew of ad requests for various different devices and users and locales that don't actually exist on the back end. There's a high level of trust that's required when you work with an SSAI provider. So if an operation can adequately make their traffic look like it's coming from a legitimate SSAI provider, it's very hard in terms of a transparency perspective and measurement perspective to actually figure out what's on the backside, what those edge devices are actually doing, or if they even exist at all. But we were able to identify that through a handful of different means that we can talk about some of them as we go through this process. But that's what we mean when we say that this is SSAI spoofing. It is a large-scale data center-driven approach to scale up ad fraud for these high cost or high cost per milli devices, because that's a usual case of operation for connected TV video. Can we go to the next slide, please, Adam? And when we say that this is a single ICE operation, ICEBUCKET itself, we've been tracking and monitoring this actively for the last few months, including our responses to it. But our collection of different identifiers for this traffic itself as fraud are all extremely correlated with each other. So within this plot, there are multiple lines behind the volumes of these different indicators. But as you can see, almost all of them line up perfectly with each other, or almost perfectly. And that's how we can say that this is one coherent operation and not a copy of a whole bunch of different operations seemingly acting together. One thing that's not shown here is some of our other generic connected TV and ad fraud markers that are also involved with this, because a portion of the traffic was caught by some of our other defenses that we had deployed previously. But these are the ones that are directed defenses against ICEBUCKET itself. And I think with that high-level overview, I think we can dive into the questions themselves.
Sure. Thank you, Mike. We do have a couple of questions coming in here through the chat. So I am going to go a little bit out of order for those who are asking questions. I just want to keep on certain themes here. So were the spoofers between SSAI and SSPS pretending to be valid SSAI, or between SSP and DSP pretending to be connected to a valid SSAI server?
That's a good question, and Demetrius, feel free to hop in as well. Usually when we consider an SSAI spoofing, they're sitting between what they're declaring are those edge devices and the SSPs. So they are submitting those ad requests and consuming the video advertisements to purportedly stitch those into the videos themselves. But that's usually where they'll sit. If they sat somewhere else in the ecosystem, we'd likely call this operation something else. But based on the signatures that we've seen from both the bid requests and how those ads are being consumed, it looks to be in that location that we showed on that previous slide between the fake edge devices and the SSPs.
Great, thank you. Another question here. Thank you, Will, for submitting. We'd be curious to know how the perpetrators monetize this activity. How did they actually pull the money out of the supply chain? Demetrius, I think you were going to take this one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the monetization model here is pretty standard. What we will see is that these actors are typically sitting deep in the supply chain, where from a supply chain perspective, the relationships are more opaque, and by hiding themselves deep in the supply chain, they can monetize in a way that it's way more effective. They can jump through different publishers without having to report themselves in standards like sellers.json, and the lack of standards across the industry is making it much easier for them to successfully monetize their operations. So that was one way that we saw them monetizing, by actually building these fraudulent publisher accounts, and pretty much the entire traffic that they were monetizing was part of this operation. These are, let's call them, cash out publishers. But what we've also noticed, which was extremely interesting in this operation, is that there were also publishers, legitimate publishers, that we know that are representing, I'm not sure if I should call them premium, but known channels or apps in the CTV ecosystem. And that's where we saw something interesting. We started seeing traffic that we would consider ICEBUCKET mixed up with what we think is the organic traffic from that publisher. And that could indicate two things here. It could either be the case that the publisher is actually sourcing traffic from a fraud as a service model, which in CTV we haven't seen so far too much, or the bad actors are intentionally creating noise in the system. So the publisher, in a sense, the legitimate publisher, the traffic that is generated, the ICEBUCKET traffic from that legitimate publisher is probably collateral damage in that scenario. We don't have enough indicators to tell whether it's a fraud as a service or a noise in the system for the legitimate publishers, but it's a very interesting observation, especially for connected TV traffic. We've seen that a lot on web, we've seen it on mobile, but not that much on connected TVs.
Great, thank you, Demetrius. Another question here from Hallie. Which party in the supply chain needs to be more diligent and better vet these SSAI servers? What questions asked to these parties?
I can answer the question. So from what we've seen, most of the DSPs were not particularly impacted from this operation, and that says a lot to the collective effort we've made over the past few years to secure the ecosystem. Where I mentioned that there were cases of direct publishers selling this inventory, but that was just the minority of the operation. The vast majority was sold through the cash out, let's say, publishers that were deeper in the supply chain. And that's where I think we need to do a lot more work on the SSP side. And as part of our report, we talked a little bit about things that we can collectively do as an industry. Examples include adopting standards like appads.txt for connected TV inventory, broader adoption of the sellers.json standard. The vast majority of the cash out publishers were not actually declaring their names in the sellers.json files. And also we talked a little bit about broader industry efforts that manufacturers and CTV platforms could help us drive.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note also that that while this is an SSAI spoofing operation, it is acting like an SSAI provider. It isn't trying to impersonate one particular SSAI provider. Server-side ad insertion itself is a really good method to provide those advertisements to especially low-powered devices, which is extremely common in the CTV space, and you know, in some ways, you know, help monetize those areas. But there is a lower level of transparency with those SSAI providers themselves, and some of those standards that Demetrius mentioned can help provide more clarity into that ecosystem too. So we don't want to say that, you know, an SSAI provider is purely at fault just because they happen to there is this operation that happened to look like them. In the same way that the various devices that were involved aren't actually, they're the targets or the victims of this operation.
Great, thank you. As a follow-up to that, did this affect publishers that have their own proprietary SSAI?
I don't think we have full exposure into every single SSAI to publisher relationship within the ecosystem. A lot of spoofing attacks will spoof both the devices, and the thing that we haven't touched on as much is that if you spoof the device, you inherently also have to spoof the app itself. So it is possible that there were apps within this operation where they have a single direct relationship with a single SSAI provider. If we weren't aware of that before we started looking at this operation, it did not come up as part of our analyses, but that's it's a possibility.
Thank you. So just reading the section here, you mentioned that most of this operation took place across SSP's selling publisher inventory, rather than it taking place where the publisher sold inventory directly. Is direct publisher sold inventory less susceptible to SSAI spoofing than when it's bought programmatically? And if so, why?
I wouldn't say that there is both models are equally risky when it comes to SSAI spoofing. The big difference has to do with the scalability of the business model. As long as you can scale your operation by having cash out publishers sitting in the supply chain, you don't have to go through the process of working with direct publishers and mixing up your inventory. It's I would say it's much easier to monetize your operation with cash out publishers, and that's probably why we observed that being the majority of how the operation was monetized. But both direct publisher relationships and cash out publishers can be equally impacted from SSAI spoofing.
Demetrius, do you mind just defining cash out publisher?
Right. So the way I'm defining cash out publishers are publishers designed, dedicated on selling this fraudulent inventory. The vast majority of the inventory that these publishers are offering in OpenRTB is fraudulent and part of this operation. And that's how most of this inventory was transacted. A smaller portion was ICEBUCKET inventory mixed up with legitimate CTV inventory from direct publishers.
Thank you. If White-Ups was working with a publisher directly, it wouldn't have stopped this, considering the SSAI app is being spoofed at the SSP level. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. So when we work directly with publishers, that allows us to have a better understanding of what the ground truth of their traffic is. For instance, if we can see the exact list of app IDs and as they're updated and what devices they're running on, we can easily tell the difference when we see a similar app ID or the exact same app ID, but from a different location in the ad tech ecosystem, which would allow us to protect essentially that spoofing of their app, even beyond the SSAI spoofing part of it. The idea there is that since we know exactly where our publisher is operating, when we see that outside of it, we can tell for sure that that's spoofing because it's not a part of their inventory. To a lesser extent, we can see where they're trying to do similar copycat stuff. So maybe you are publisher X and your app ID is being declared slightly differently, but it looks about the same or has particular substrings within its app ID or bundle ID that make it appear to be the same as your publisher. We can also defend against that with those direct relationships.
Another thing I would add here is by working directly with publishers, we can significantly improve our ability to collect valuable signals, especially in setups like SSAI, where transparency, just because of the way that, like Mike described, SSAI is working, is a big challenge for offering effective protection of the inventory.
Cool. Thank you guys for that. Is there anything about certain devices which makes them more susceptible to this type of scam?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So within the blog post, we give a breakdown of what devices were being spoofed by this operation. And while we don't know exactly what was in the back of the fraudsters' minds in this case, we can make a couple broad generalizations behind it. The largest proportion of the traffic, especially at its peak, was spoofing Roku devices. Roku is well regarded as a secure and high CPM or cost per milli platform with really engaged users. So that makes them a target for a lot of these operations. If a fraudster sees that and sees that they can make X times as much by spoofing Roku as opposed to spoofing something else, then they'll try to spoof Roku. And that's just what their target is. With SSAI spoofing itself, it's even easier than if you're trying to act like the device itself. You just have to act like a data center server. But even within that, for this operation, there's also other devices that you wouldn't expect to be spoofed at all. So some of that might be where the fraudsters are trying to look into the lower volume proportion of what devices are usually out there in the wild or actually in people's homes, as a way to say, okay, well, if this device isn't commonly used, it might be less likely for someone on a security research team or a threat intelligence team to break apart and figure out how the device actually works in order to get those extremely important ground truth signals on the fact that that device is being impersonated somewhere else. And we suspect that some of that was also at play as part of this operation. We can't know for sure because we haven't actually asked the fraudsters themselves. And there are various other devices that are involved in this operation that fell outside of that initial plot. Additionally, as we worked against this operation, they shifted some of those distributions themselves to say, okay, here's more mobile traffic now, or here's more connected TV or subcomponents there. But within that, that was still under our guise of tracking and monitoring and stopping this operation. So that portion of their adaptation was extremely easy to watch and monitor and track through time.
Great, thank you. Just as a follow-up to that, is there any risk implication for the owners of the devices themselves?
By owners of the devices themselves, do you mean the regular consumers that happen to have a connected TV or mobile device in their ownership, or do you mean the companies involved?
The regular consumer, so the end consumer.
Yeah. So that's an important point. This particular spoofing operation is a spoofing operation. So none of these devices actually exist. We see a variety of different devices in terms of how they're declared that look similar to ones that you might have in your home right now, but nothing is actually running on those devices. In terms of when we discuss what types of invalid traffic there are, spoofing operations like this are part of false representation, where the traffic is representing itself as something that it's not. In this case, the traffic was representing itself as an SSAI provider delivering content to CTV devices, but it was just a fraud scheme operated in a data center with no real devices involved. When we talk about different types of invalid traffic, like malware on device, that's where a fraudster is utilizing spare resources or a device that's actually in a person's home to commit fraud in the background. And that's not what we're seeing in this case.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to combine a couple questions here. People are interested to hear about, what was it that we were able to see that wasn't controlled by the spoofers? What patterns did we start to see to lead to the discovery of ICEBUCKET? And then as sort of a follow-up to that, if we could just talk about, once we saw what was happening, we take internally, and what are our steps leading up to the publishing of something like this?
Yeah, all very good questions. Obviously, we won't be able to talk about exactly everything that we identify within the traffic. For one, this is as the plot on your screen can show, there's still some small proportion of this traffic out there. We're actively monitoring and stopping this traffic while it's still flowing through our systems, because we haven't actually tracked down the actual people involved or taken over the infrastructure that's being used. So we can't divulge every single everything that we identified. But on a whole, the way that White Ops works is that we have a combination of security researchers who pick apart how devices work, how web browsers work, how apps work, to figure out what those technical signals behind what real traffic looks like or what real device traffic looks like, and we look for discrepancies there. We can also look at discrepancies from various other behavioral signals, like where that traffic is coming from, where how those devices are being declared or used, and we're able to build up a lot of really good evidence behind what we human traffic to actually look like on its back end. Additionally, we have threat intelligence who works around trying to track down the actual perpetrators involved and how they're designing malware to do this, or how they're actually taking over different parts of the internet or different infrastructure to commit these schemes. So we combine those aspects of security research, threat intelligence research, as well as just digging through the vast amounts of data that we collect from the ad tech ecosystem to figure out what is going on. And I know that's a general answer to how the team operates, but that exact same workflow is just transported over to connected TV and to SSAI, with the additional caveats of having to understand, what do we expect SSAI traffic to look like? What do we expect CTV traffic to look like? What are the issues with signal collection within a connected TV environment? provider from even allowing us to see the edge device. So there's a fair amount of work and additional experience that we have behind how these systems should normally operate that we use to identify when someone has messed up.
And I see Aaron from our threat intelligence team is on the line. I'd like to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So not only do we have the technical signals, but we spend a lot of time studying the tactics and procedures of this threat actor. So that covers everything from the type of attack that we were seeing, but also some of the heuristics around the infrastructure that they were using, some of the patterns around the user agents. There's a lot of different things that we can pick apart when describing how this actor works, and that just gave us further confidence that the traffic that we were seeing could be tied to a specific campaign by this group.
Yeah, and I think, Megan, there's also the second part of the question was how did we respond to this? Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you.
Yeah. So once we were able to identify this and treat it as a cohesive operation, as I mentioned earlier, there are some portions of this that we had caught by some of our general purpose anti-fraud mechanisms for connected TV. But when we saw that all of these signatures were aligned with each other, like we had to treat this as one cohesive effort. And what we did first is that we said, okay, we've identified this traffic as fraudulent. What are the hallmarks, the indicators of this traffic when the ads actually show up? This is the detection side of things, and for those of you who are clients of ours, this is where Fraud Sensor comes into play. Actually identifying where that traffic is when those ads show up, getting those technical signals, getting that technical evidence, and flagging it as such, so that we can both inform our own follow-up analyses as well as alert our clients to what is going on. We also want to stop the actual flow of money to these fraudsters too, and that's where our prevention, the prevention side of things come in, which is MediaGuard integrations that actually stops those bid requests from going through. And since we can see that that this traffic is coming from different locations within the ad tech ecosystem, we can highlight those and stop those purchases of that inventory space when we see it within MediaGuard itself. And in some cases, that MediaGuard response is driven by the signatures that we directly see in Fraud Sensor. So for example, if we saw that this set of devices is clearly from a desktop in someone's apartment instead of a whole bunch of connected TV devices, we can identify that through the technical evidence behind that device line about itself. But we can also look at other types of aggregate evidence behind what's happening. And in the case of ICEBUCKET, we also have the signature of who they're trying to spoof. So where in the United States, what type of devices are there, and how they're declaring that traffic. Once we have an idea of the boundaries of this operation, we can again look for discrepancies where, okay, they've messed up X, Y, and Z, but got indicator alpha correct or something like that. But those X, Y, and Z parts are where we can also identify that that's irrespective of what the technical evidence tells us, but supported by it. And those two sides work hand in hand and are constantly providing new intelligence and new information to the other side. For instance, we could surface something as just looking weird on the MediaGuard side, and then dig into the technical evidence to see, like, why is that weird? What else is going on behind there? And in a lot of cases, that might come down to directly investigating a particular application or a particular website, which is what the threat intelligence team does a fair amount of. or it could come down to like, okay, that looks weird because of the way that that particular publisher or app is actually built. And in those cases, we've proactively reached out to them either through our clients or in some cases directly to get information about what's actually going on, because we want to be very, very false positive conscious, where when we make a determination, like we know that it's fraud. I think that answers the question, Megan.
Yes, yes. So one thing that I see coming up here is, there's a lot of concern within the industry on timing of all of this. How long are these investigations taking? What is our typical time frame from the first time we see something funky going on to get to a hypothesis, to get to a conclusion, to develop markers? Can you kind of talk about that process?
Yeah, and every single approach is gonna be slightly different based on the resources of the team, what else happens to be going on, how much of the traffic is already stopped, how much do we expect the monetary impact to be. While we don't know for sure how much money these fraudsters were getting, there are ways that you can try to make an estimate based on the CPMs. And so even though connected TV is a small proportion of what traffic we see, we still have an entire team that's been spun up internally to address it, because we know that while that's a small proportion of impressions, it's a really large proportion of potential money that's being lost and going to these fraudsters. So it really just depends on how clear cut the signatures that we're able to identify are, how much volume is there, and what else happens to be going on. As I mentioned, a proportion of ICEBUCKET's traffic was already getting caught by some of our general purpose connected TV anti-fraud defenses, and some of that potentially slightly delayed how we identified and responded to it. But in this case, like when we said, okay, this is one operation, we need to address it, it was all hands on deck for essentially end of January and all of February to address and combat against it. Just because it was this large thing that we'd identified and understood exactly what the scale could eventually be if we didn't take action then.
I want to add something.
Oh, go ahead, Dimitris.
Thank you. I wanted to add something here from a broader research cycle perspective. This is one of the most important metrics that we are tracking as a team. We call it internally time to detection, and it starts from the time we are exposed to a threat all the way to time to active mitigation. And that's what we are trying to optimize all of our processes, from doing analysis to pushing, deploying new changes in our software in production. And that's how we orchestrate the entire R&D team, from security researchers, data scientists, data analysts, all the way to people in operations and people who are working on the actual infrastructure engineering side. And although I can't share actual numbers here, we've improved a lot over the past few years when it comes to time to detection.
Aaron,
one last thing.
Oh, go ahead.
I wanted, sorry about that. One last thing I want to add is this is one of the things that we would like to also think through when it comes to response to this type of attacks. The current rules of the game, especially in programmatic, are giving an advantage to bad actors like ICEBUCKET, because the reality is that in most cases, after MediaGuard has made a decision, there are no ways of reversing such decisions, because billing is just processed. There are no post-serve changes that can be made in most scenarios, and that's something that we are starting exploring with our partners on pilot programs on how we can, after the fact, change the economics, which would really impact the revenue streams of actors like ICEBUCKET, and would reduce the feedback back to the bad guys when we are catching them.
Yeah, and one thing I just wanted to bookend there was we actually had some early indications of ICEBUCKET that while we didn't at the onset associate with the ICEBUCKET group or a specific campaign, our anomaly detection typically works in a way that we're able to see certain anomalies in the traffic and bookmark it or continue to monitor it over time. One thing I liked about this specific investigation, and I don't think we've told any of our customers this, but it's a fun fact, was that a piece of customer intelligence was actually given as a tip to us that helped further give us confidence that this was something that we should be investigating. So it's really awesome when our customers are also really engaged with the investigation process. I think it just gives us so much more confidence in what we're looking at when we have engagement like that.
Great, thank you, Aaron. So I just want to move a little bit here into the what now. Go ahead.
Really, Aaron. Microphone mic.
Hey, Mike, we're having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. Demetrius, are you able to hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, great. I'm not sure if Mike is just having a problem with his mic. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. A lot of the questions are, okay, now what? Now that, White Ops has exposed this, what can we be doing both as publishers that have their own proprietary SSAI, as well as publishers in general? What do we do from here, and how do we prevent this from happening in the future?
It's really all about securing the ecosystem. Connected TVs are an extremely attractive type of inventory for marketeers, and that makes a lot of sense. High CPMs, very engaged users, but the level of transparency and the level of security of this inventory is not adequate for its value. And that's where we need to work a little bit more as an industry. Again, we've made a lot of progress over the past few years, but there are more things that we could do. And the first thing especially for SSAI setups that we would like to see across the industry is a way to validate, to verify that there is a real device sitting behind that server. And we've been working with SSAI vendors, we've been working with manufacturers, pushing for the adoption of such standards. You may be familiar with ads.cert, which is a way of cryptographically signing requests coming out of ad servers. A similar type of standard could be implemented both on the SSAI level, but also on the device level. And that would give us a much, much higher confidence that we are interacting, we are talking to a real device. One thing that we should never forget is that bad guys will always do the bare minimum to make their operations successful. And at this state of the CTV ecosystem, they don't even need to have a real device behind the scenes, because they can pretty much spoof everything. And that's where we should start as an industry. Of course, securing the supply chain is an equally important thing. We talked about the collective protection, having direct publisher relationships, and that's why the buy side was less impacted from this operation. And from that perspective, there are a couple of things that we should be doing as an industry. We talked about the adoption of apps.txt and the adoption of sellers.json. The vast majority of the inventory that we saw didn't have their suppliers declared in the respective sellers.json files.
Great. Thank you for that. Mike, I think you're back on, and we were just talking about, and I'm not sure if you heard all of Demetrius's answer, so we don't want to be repetitive, but we were just talking about, what now? How can people prevent something like this from happening again in the future? Another question that came in, and maybe Aaron, this would be one for you, is how can people who maybe aren't partnered?
I think I heard most.
Oh, go ahead, Mike. Hey, Aaron, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay,
I
let's
have a
hop.
little problem with the mic, but
Are you having
good.
a problem? Okay, I think Mike is as
Yeah,
well.
I can't. It's okay.
We'll get there. So a question that somebody had was, if we're not, partnered with White Ops in any way, how is it that we can get information to you around this sort of stuff as well? And I know you mentioned that one of White Ops partners had reached out with some information that helped on this investigation. What does that look like for people who are not currently White Ops clients or partners?
Yeah. So I like to think that we do a lot of work with outreach and security research. I mean, like a lot of our founding members are on Twitter, pretty active in the InfoSec community. We have a public tip line, and that's tips@whiteops.com. But we also have things like our Twitter, Keybase, which is really popular with security researchers. That's actually a really great way to contact us, because on Keybase, you actually have end-to-end encryption, as well as several public key proofs that you're talking to the White Ops security research team. So there's a few different avenues. All of this is on our website, so you can kind of pick your poison in terms of what app you want to use, but we have multiple avenues open. So anyone who would want to have a conversation, we'll make sure it gets to the right people.
Thanks, Aaron.
And I wanted to add one more thing here. We have this principle that we never publish something that is exposing a third party, even if they are not a direct customer of ours, without notifying them. That's a common practice we try to have in all of our publications. We will notify anyone who's impacted before publishing. And the other thing I want to add is, while we are running these investigations, we typically try to go really deep and understand the mechanics of such operations. You've probably seen other reports that we've published with Methbot or Eve, and that involves a lot of collaboration with third parties, again, that are not necessarily our direct customers. So there is also that aspect of proactive outreach from the White Ops side in such cases.
Great, thanks, Demetrius. And Aaron, I think this one will be for you. Do we have any information about the actors behind this? You know, similar to some of the other things that we've done where we've been able to attribute it. Do we know anything about the bad guys in this situation? And if so, what's being?
Yeah, so this is actually a really complex group, and there's several different aspects that speak to that. Part of this operation, it's actually pretty novel. We haven't necessarily seen a attack this voluminous, this complicated in CTV SSAI space, and the level of technical sophistication as well as operational sophistication is pretty high. A lot of times with kind of like lower hanging fruit of threat actors and different attacks, we actually know a lot about these actors, and we actually know a lot about where they hang out online, and that sort of thing didn't happen for ICEBUCKET. There's no forum, there's no chat room that we ostensibly see where we see someone talking about this type of attack. So not only are we seeing like kind of like novel technical attacks here, but we're also looking at an actor who is very likely working on their own. It could be a small group, but they don't talk to people. They aren't working with others. They're highly sophisticated, very likely, and they know what they're doing. They have a large amount of familiarity with the SSAI pipeline, as well as the tech they need to pull off a scheme like this. So with that regard, we can kind of start cutting around the edges of what this group might look like. We know that there are certain like technical signals to look for, but we're only just beginning to get a picture of what the threat group is and who they are and where they are. And that's an investigation that will likely carry on far beyond the reaches of what our technical integrations right now are doing to protect it. So that will just be ongoing investigation for us as we continue to watch how they adapt to countermeasures.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay, we have just a few minutes here left. I know I didn't get to everybody's questions here in the chat area. There's quite a few of them. We will give access to this team for further questions. I think I can probably type it, or Adam, if you don't mind putting it in the chat for me. We've set up an alias icebucket@whiteops.com. So if anything here was not answered, please feel free to ping us there. Again, this session will also be recorded, and we'll be getting this out to everybody on this panel. Just, while we have a couple more minutes, I wanted to give the floor to Demetrius, Aaron, or Mike, if there's any kind of final thoughts that you'd like to leave the group with.
One of the things I wanted to mention is that our intention when we publish things like ICEBUCKET is not to talk about another big operation and how marketeers are losing millions of dollars or whatever. Our main intention is to bring awareness. And for CTV, we talked about a number of things that we believe that we should be doing as an industry to better secure the ecosystem. And CTV is a great opportunity for marketeers. And when it's done right, within that kind of collective ecosystem of protection, we think it's a perfectly fine inventory that marketeers should be transacting.
Thank you. Mike, any parting thoughts for us?
Audio check first.
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh my gosh. Apologies for the audio problems. I think I was on a 5-second delay, which is terrible. Yeah, just echoing what Dimitri said, as well as a part earlier when I had the audio delays, where Aaron was talking about some of our client relationships and partnerships. Those aspects of working together can be extremely powerful for stopping. It helped dramatically to stop this operation, as well as future ones that come up. So developing those cross-industry collaborations, advancing standards, and really working to secure this part of the ecosystem at a very early stage will just make it even more attractive for different marketeers to use. But it also becomes an even more secure part of the ecosystem that can be more trusted and well regarded than it already is.
Great, thanks. Aaron, anything from you?
Yeah, I suppose I would just want to thank all the people who were partners with us on this. And you know, this is kind of a rolling thing that we do. We are constantly looking at new threats, emerging threats, and monitoring for what could be known threat actors or new threat actors. So yeah, I welcome everybody on the call to continue to engage with us and keep watching for what we're doing. And if you have anything that you think might look kind of weird, we're always happy to talk. So just want to drive that one home.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Aaron and Demetrius and Mike for joining us today, and thank you all. I think we had upwards of like 75 people on this call, which is awesome. Hope everyone's staying safe. Please let us know over at what to make your lives easier during this unprecedented and strange time for all of us. We're here for you. So with that, I think we will end the session, and we look forward to speaking with everybody soon.